them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
Okay, so today we're going deep on something pretty interesting. The intersection of politics and like Wall Street money moves.
Oh yeah, this should be good.
You sent over this AP News piece, and the headline itself is like, whoa. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene bought stocks hit hard by Trump tariffs during the market meltdown.
During the market meltdown, yeah.
So that's what we're going to unpack. Like, what did Representative Greene actually do with her investments? What was going on in the market with all this tariff stuff? And then, like, the big question, should people in Congress even be able to trade stocks?
I think that's a question a lot of people have been asking.
Yeah, for sure. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, so this AP News article, it really paints a picture of a really volatile time in the market, and a lot of it was driven by anxieties around trade policy, specifically tariffs.
Okay, so like tariffs, for anyone who's not totally familiar, that's basically like taxes on imported goods.
Exactly. And when you start talking about putting those taxes on things, it creates a chain reaction.
Right.
Businesses have to pay more, their costs go up, and then sometimes people just buy less stuff.
Which like obviously hits the stock prices of companies doing business internationally.
Right. And the article calls out some pretty big names that were feeling the heat: Lululemon, Dell, Computer, Amazon, even the parent company of Restoration Hardware, RH.
And we're not talking about like small dips here. They were seeing something like a 40% drop on average.
Yeah, in a pretty short period of time.
Yeah.
So, that kind of drop would make anyone nervous.
Absolutely. And to like fully grasp this, we got to remember what was happening right before this all went down. The article mentions that Trump had actually sent out a buy signal on social media, and then right after that, there was this pause on some of the tariffs. So like first you have the buy signal, then all this uncertainty about tariffs, and then a little bit of relief. It's no wonder the market was going haywire.
It was like a roller coaster. It must have been so stressful for investors.
Oh, totally. And it wasn't just like numbers on a screen either. The article talks about how RH's CEO, Gary Friedman, was on a conference call when their stock totally tanked, and he was like, oh, shh.
You don't hear a CEO say that every day?
Seriously, he was caught off guard.
Clearly. So you have this backdrop of tariffs potentially happening and stock values plummeting, and then you see what Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene is doing. She's basically what you would call a contrarian investor.
Meaning?
She's going against the grain, buying when everyone else is selling.
Interesting. So she was actually buying up stock in these companies that were taking a hit because of the tariffs.
And not just any companies, the ones that were really in the crosshairs of those trade policies that she's publicly supporting.
Hold on. So she's a big supporter of the tariffs that are causing all this market uncertainty. And at the same time, she's buying stock in the companies that are getting hurt by those very tariffs.
Yep. The article specifically mentions she bought shares in Lululemon, Dell, Computer, Amazon, and RH, all companies we just talked about.
That is fascinating. The article does say that we don't know exactly how much money she put in because financial disclosures only show ranges and dates, not the specific amounts.
Right. So we don't have the full picture, but it is interesting to look at what happened to some of those investments right after she bought them.
Yeah, the article mentions that RH, for example, saw its stock price jump up more than a third after Greene bought it on that Friday.
Yeah, after that big drop that freaked out the CEO, it rebounded pretty quickly.
That's a pretty impressive return in a short time.
Yeah.
And what about Dell?
Dell's stock had lost more than half its value, but then went up 9% after Greene bought it.
Okay, so at least initially, some of these investments seem to have paid off.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
And this kind of situation also brings up a much wider discussion about whether members of Congress should be allowed to trade stocks at all.
Yeah, it's a huge debate right now. The article talks about how there are actually bipartisan efforts to ban this practice completely.
Lawmakers from both sides are saying this is a problem.
Why is that? What are the arguments there?
Well, there were concerns about insider trading, of course.
Right.
And just the potential for conflicts of interest. When you're in a position to influence companies and then you're also investing those companies, it raises some eyebrows.
Right. Like, are you making decisions based on what's good for the country or what's good for your portfolio?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article mentions some of the proposed bills. The Transparent Representation Upholding Service and Trust in Congress Act.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Right. And there's another one called the End Congressional Stock Trading Act.
Straight to the point.
But here's the thing. None of those bills have actually become law yet.
So for now, it's still fair game.
Exactly. Which brings us back to Representative Greene. The article includes her response when asked about these stock purchases and the potential for conflicts of interest.
And what did she say?
She basically said that she has a financial advisor who manages her investments and that they have a fiduciary agreement.
So her advisor is legally obligated to act in her best financial interest.
Right. And she also pointed out that all of her investments are reported publicly as required by law.
Okay, so transparency is there, but the article also really emphasizes how much Greene publicly supports those very tariffs that were rocking the market.
Yeah, it even includes a quote from her on X, formerly Twitter, remember? She called tariffs a powerful, proven source of leverage to protect our national interests and said, "We will win this trade war."
So on one hand, she's saying her advisor handles everything, but on the other hand, she's very vocal about supporting policies that directly impact the companies she's investing in.
It's a bit of a gray area, right?
Yeah.
Even with a fiduciary agreement, does a public figure's strong opinions create a perception of conflict?
It does make you wonder.
And maybe even indirectly influence the advisor's choices.
Definitely food for thought. The article also gives us a sense of how the overall market was feeling at that time. It mentions that stocks initially jumped when some tariffs were paused, but then they started to fall again.
Right. So it seems like investors were still unsure about what would happen in the long run.
Like they weren't totally convinced that things would be okay.
Which shows just how complex and unpredictable the economy can be, especially when it comes to things like trade policy.
Okay, so let's recap this for our listeners. This whole story from AP News gives us a real-life example of how someone's personal financial decisions, in this case a member of Congress, can be tied to big economic trends that are being shaped by political actions like these tariffs.
Right. It's all connected. Representative Greene decided to buy stock in companies that were struggling because of those tariffs, which suggests she believed those policies would ultimately benefit those companies, or at least their stock prices.
And it raises a really important question about whether lawmakers should be able to trade individual stocks at all, especially when their political actions can directly impact those stocks.
It's a debate that's gaining momentum on both sides of the aisle. You know, the arguments for banning it often revolve around maintaining public trust and ensuring that lawmakers are focused on the greater good, not their own personal gain.
Because even the appearance of a conflict of interest can be damaging.
Absolutely. So this whole situation with Representative Greene is like a microcosm of a much larger issue. It shows how closely intertwined politics and finance really are, and how the decisions made in Washington can ripple out and affect individual investors.
It also highlights the ethical gray areas that exist when someone in a position of power is making investment decisions in areas that they can directly influence through their work.
And that brings us to a question for you, our listener. How much should a public figure's personal financial moves be in line with the policies they're pushing? And what kind of safeguards do we need to have to make sure everything is transparent and to prevent potential conflicts of interest when politics and the economy collide like this?
Yeah, it's a really complicated issue, and there are no easy answers, but it's definitely something we all need to be thinking about and talking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
And we'll catch you next time.
See you then.